Hello dear friends, I'm Samuel Moore, and what a video I have for you today. As many of you know, in 2023 I launched my brand new interview series Talking Music, the show where you get to enjoy long-form discussions with superb and fascinating musicians. We've had many brilliant guests on the show over the past year, and as such, I thought today we'd look back on some of the best moments. There are many more interviews to come in 2024 with some of the world's leading musicians, but for now, kick back, relax, and enjoy the 2023 highlights. I think you'll be able to relate to what I'm about to say. I often find when I speak to music enthusiasts, there's often a perception that flamenco is an art form that can only be authentically expressed by people who've grown up in Spain. But here's the thing. I would argue that the presence of artists like yourself rather suggests that this perception isn't necessarily grounded in the objective modern reality of flamenco. To a certain extent, I would say, certainly in the past 20 years, flamenco has evolved to become a global art form. And what I mean by that is there are now practitioners across the globe who perform it with authenticity and conviction, irrespective of their cultural heritage. But this is a big subject, so let's get your perspective on it. What do you think on this?
It's definitely a big subject for sure. I mean, I agree with you. It's a global art form now. You could say, like, you could say someone that is born into a flamenco family in Spain has obvious advantage from the beginning because the big part of it really, and I think you'll understand what I'm saying, or any musician will understand what I'm saying for any particular genre, if you want to put it that way, is familiarity, having it in your ear, hearing it so often that you don't think of it in some sort of academic way, that you know what to expect when it comes. So I think having that familiarity certainly helps. So I started guitar very late, comparatively speaking. I started when I was like 17 or 18. I never picked up the guitar before that. And it was years after that before I touched flamenco at all. It would have been easier if I had been doing it since I was 6, for sure. But I just decided that I was going to work 3 times as hard to get where I wanted to go. It's it's a funny one. There is one thing I think that's important. If you're going to get into a music like flamenco, and if you decide that you're going to play flamenco versus some music that's inspired by flamenco, which is fine, and nothing wrong with that. But if you want to compose flamenco music, or if you want to play flamenco music or accompany singers or dancers, it's extremely important, like that, you try to gain that familiarity as much as possible as well, that you learn the traditional language, that you learn all the things that are normal to say. I mean, say, musically speaking, because that's the shared language. That's the thing you're going to have in common with other artists that come from Spain or wherever else. Everybody understands the same language. So I think, for anybody that's getting into it, or that's starting their journey, or any stage in their journey, just to kind of bear that in mind, like, as much familiarity as possible, and that means as much listening as possible. So listening. And if you have the opportunity, hang out with flamencos, go to parties where there are flamenco people, and play with them as much as possible. And don't be afraid to make a fool of yourself. Just play and learn, because that's the reality over there. You play and you learn, you soak it in by hearing, by seeing. So I would say, like, you have to bear that in mind first before before you can accept it, you know, that yes, it's a global art form, but it has rules, as you know, it has norms, it has rhythms and forms which in a sense are extremely rigid in one aspect. And if you're going to play a particular palo, for example, there's language inside that you need to know. There's rhythms and norms inside that you need to know. Now, if you go that far and you're familiar with it, and you understand the traditional language, you understand what comes where, what is expected of you in this position or in that position, if you're a company and if you're or whatever else, then I can't. There's no reason then why you can't authentically, like you say, express yourself as a flamenco artist. None at all. You will have to work hard, obviously, but it's fun work. So
I agree with pretty much everything you said there, and I also like the way you framed that, because you're right. In order to become a master, you have to embrace the role of a novice. You can't have the one without the other. And you're absolutely right. You will go into many situations where you will make a fool of yourself, but you will learn from it. And
yeah,
and those are very valuable experiences.
they're extremely valuable experience. I've had many.
We're both guitarists, and most of the people watching this are guitarists. Guitarists do like to talk about guitars.
Yes.
And it occurs to me that you're uniquely placed to answer a really interesting question. Because of the various things that you've done throughout your career, I think it's fair to say you've played hundreds, possibly thousands of guitars.
I've recorded thousands.
Yeah.
Played hundreds,
Many of whom made by some of the best luthiers to have ever lived.
yeah.
What are the valuable takeaways you have got from those experiences? What are the lessons you've learned from that?
Okay. Basically, forget the things you think you know about a guitar, and find something that feels and sounds good to you. The less experienced a guitarist you are, the less helpful this is as advice. And I understand that, in which case, maybe, you know, but it always shocked me that, you know, at basically the used guitar market or the guitar market in general, I would say 90% of it is based on whose name is on the label and the condition of the guitar. 90% of the value of a guitar, right? The price that we put. And then the last 10% is, does it sound good and does it play well? And it's just completely backwards, right? I mean, I have played god-awful guitars by the biggest names, and I've played mind-blowing guitars by people I've never heard of. You know, there's that one Yamaha guitar that's like $350 and it's like the starter flamenco. You know, 1 out of every 15 of those is an amazing guitar that, you know, can compete with, you know, most $2,000 guitars. Because if you make enough factory guitars, some of them are going to turn out great. And those Yamahas, by the way, consistently amazing. For the money. So basically, like, I just think, like, you know, I had the good fortune to record like at least a dozen Torres guitars, right? I mean, these are the most expensive, the most famous, the best known classical guitars ever. And what I think is hilarious is that I don't think a single one of them was made out of wood that a contemporary luthier would ever be caught dead making a guitar out of. It's all basically made out of shit wood that's just like whatever happened to be lying around. And the genius of the man was that he turned anything into an amazing sounding guitar that somehow 180 years later still sounds great. So however he did that, I don't know. But, you know, you see the crap wood that's on some of these guitars and you're like, all right, so how tight the grain is, all that talk, forget it. Like, do not worry about how tight the grain is. Do not worry about who the person who made the guitar is. Don't worry about, you know, what it costs unless you can't afford it, you know, then worry about that, obviously. But how it feels and if it inspires you with the sound that you make are the only two things that matter.
I think that's pretty good advice. Thank you.
You're welcome. I have a whole soapbox about this.
I'd like to ask a couple of questions, if I may, related to listening. One thing that I really enjoy about talking to musicians is you always come away with things where you think, oh, I've never heard of that before and it sounded really good. I'll go and check that out. So I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about the music you enjoy listening to. So let me start with this. Who are the guitarists that have most inspired you? And most importantly, they don't have to be classical players. You can cast your net as wide as you like.
Yeah, it's a good question. You know what? I know people usually have like 5 or 6 names to just absolutely off the bat, just spiel off. But I think I always really struggle with that question because I don't know whether I have like a favorite guitarist or a favorite this or that. I do listen to a lot of different music, but I don't know whether I listen to it in a way that I don't know. Yeah, to be honest, like the as cliche as it probably sounds, the guitarists in general that I have found that have inspired me most, I think, or that I've taken things from and learned so much from, are actually the people that I studied with. You know, who some of whom aren't actually professional guitarists anymore, or but I just think, I don't know. It's really annoying answer. I know. I mean, obviously, I've been to concerts before of people who I've come away and felt like, wow, that was amazing. I used to don't listen to as much of it anymore, but I used to listen to a lot of acoustic guitar. Although now I've remembered that I used to listen to a lot of that, I'm definitely gonna get back. But I remember going to a couple of concerts of a guitarist called John Gomm. Have you heard of John Gomm?
I've met John Gomm, yes, yeah.
Oh, me too. He's great.
he's a great player. He's a really nice guy, yes.
Yeah, well, I only met him like after the concert, and then he signed my CD, and I was like, but just the sort of like, I don't know. When I go to gigs like that, I just find it amazing that we technically play the same instrument. I think that's the thing that's one of the things that I've been thinking about actually a lot since I graduated, is that the guitar is literally the most versatile instrument in the world. You can play so much with it. You can play any different kind of music, like absolutely anything, all the way down to lute music. And I just think there's so much scope for just anything on it because it's so versatile. But yeah, I think when I heard him play, that was just amazing. All the little things that he does with the detuning and like harmonics, and he sings, and just the sound that he gets out of it, the percussion, it's just crazy. It's just, yeah. So I don't know, that was I think maybe a gig that was a long time ago, but it sticks out in my memory as coming away and being like, wow.
No, I know exactly what you mean there. And like you, I love how it's such a diverse instrument. There is so many different ways you can play it, and there's so many different musics that are played on it. And it kind of really puts me in mind of a quote. It's kind of attributed to so many different musicians, Leonard Bernstein, Duke Ellington, but I think it's because there's such universal truth in it. Essentially, it's something along the lines of, there's only really 2 genres of music. There's good music and there's bad music, and that's kind of it. Yeah. And I think there's a nice truth in that, and we should all keep an open ear and be open to hearing new things. Let me ask a follow-up question to that. So I won't ask you to name specific musicians, but other than the guitar, what instruments do you enjoy listening to? And crucially, how has this influenced the way you play the guitar?
I've actually had this conversation with a few guitarists recently, or I mean, it was mainly more of a conversation of, if you weren't a guitarist, what other instrument would you play? And weirdly enough, I'd say like 9 out of 10 guitarists always say the cello. I don't know why. Maybe that's just people in general, because the cello is such a lovely instrument. But yeah, and to be honest, I don't listen to loads of it, but at the same time, I am starting to get into listening to more orchestral music, because I realized that sort of all my friends at music college who did play orchestral instruments, they were immersed in this world from such an early age. You know, they'd go on the residential courses, they'd be in youth orchestras, and obviously, you know, guitarists don't ever get to do that really. So whenever I saw an orchestral concert, you know, if I was at school or music college and I was there with my friends, I'd always be the one like, wow, this is amazing. Like, can you hear the sounds that are, you know, being made, and like how loud that is, and how, and they'd be like, yeah. And so I think yeah, I just love the sound of the orchestra. I just like, that's one of my like, oh, one of my kind of not regrets in the slightest, but just the fact that like I'd love to have played an orchestral instrument, or I would love to play an orchestral instrument. But also it's I've had the opportunity to play with orchestra a few times in the past few years, and that I think is like my happy place. Because you're playing an instrument that you love, you're playing music that you love, and you're accompanied by this sound world that you're just in awe of. And I think that is, I just remember coming away and being like, I want to do more of that. Whatever that was, I want to do more of that.
I'm going to embarrass you a little bit now, Alexa, so I'm going to offer you some compliments. And it's okay. I've thought this through.
Oh no.
The thing is, there's certain skills and attributes you have as a person and a musician that I think anybody, irrespective of what genre of music they specialize in, irrespective of what instrument they play, can learn valuable lessons from. They're kind of universal good skills to have. So I'd like to unpack them a little bit. So I'd like to start with this. I've always really admired how focused and driven you are. You're one of those musicians who you kind of get up, and no matter what the task is, whether it's a practice day, whether it's a rehearsal day, whether it's a concert day, you're focused, you're driven, you're in that positive frame of mind to give it your best. Now, that's not a given that that's going to be your default position. Because let's be honest, being a musician, working in the arts, it can be tough, you know, physically, mentally, financially. So let me ask you, what keeps you focused and motivated to be like that every day?
I think it's the desire to always be better than I was the day before. Even if, you know, there are some days where I don't succeed at that, but and not necessarily better at saxophone or at jazz or at music even, but just to in general be moving forward and improving and growing in some area. Because I do believe that, you know, now as a professional musician outside of school, I do believe that, you know, life experiences really contribute to our artistry and you know, what we want to create and what we want to say with our art. So even if there's a couple days where I can't, you know, get to that type of practice that I want to get to, but if I'm able to get out into, you know, some fresh air and or connect with someone I haven't connected with in a long time, or spend a little time brainstorming a writing project, then it's worth it. So the desire to just always be moving forward is really, I think, the goal. And I'm always trying to be kinder to myself, you know, in terms of if I don't meet certain measurable objectives. I often set, you know, pretty high goals for myself, and it's not always possible to achieve everything in one day, but yeah, it's a balance of wanting to always move forward, but then also trying to be present.
And do you find, is that something that has got easier for you with time and experience?
No, it's not. I wouldn't say it's something that gets easier. I would say it's like you just get more comfortable with the discomfort of like not always, you know, being where you want to be, or you know, not that I'm ever it's maybe comfortable isn't the right word, because I wouldn't say that I'm ever I'm one of those people, like I'm really not happy being unhappy, or I'm not happy being unmotivated. Like if I'm not feeling like I'm myself, I'm really unhappy about it. You know, I can't really sit with that, but I think it's like short game versus long game. So I think if you have the long game in mind, you can allow yourself some grace with some of the twists and turns. So maybe the answer to your question is a little bit yes and a little bit no. I think with time it might get a tiny bit easier, and with the experience for me, I'm always on. If I'm not on my game, I'm never like any less or more unhappy than I was the day before. It's just a blanket, like, this isn't working for me, I need to fix it, you know? So it's a back and forth.
I like that. And I also, you touched on something there that I think I'd just like to kind of tease out a little bit because it's a really important point. This idea that I don't think I'd be very concerned if anyone came out of a practice session or a recording session or whatever it is and thought, yeah, I've nailed it. There's nothing I could do better than that. You know, that I don't think that's a healthy position to be in as a musician. And you're right, you've got to kind of view it in that kind of long view, and also understand that things can scale. You know, at the end of the day, you might think, well, I didn't achieve everything I wanted to do today, but you're a fraction of a percentage better than you were in the morning. And if you roll that out over a month, that's quite a big percentage better. And you roll that out over a year, and it scales and builds. And I think that's exactly the way to look at it. So I'm really pleased you mentioned that.
Yeah, I agree with you, definitely. It's all about the small movements.
Like you, I teach a lot. And I often hear students of flamenco say something like this to me. I love flamenco, but I don't come from Spain and I didn't grow up in Andalusia, so I'll never be able to master it. What would you say to someone who says or thinks that?
Well, I say that you probably won't sound like somebody who was born in Andalusia, but you're going to sound like yourself, and you should absolutely do that. You should absolutely play flamenco and bring something from your culture to it. I mean, flamenco already had so many influences, right? There are just so many of different cultures throughout the world, and it keeps growing. So why don't you play flamenco and bring your own culture to it, your own take? And remember, it's not really about being born into it. Even Paco de Lucia, his mother was from Portugal, so he was not even fully Spanish, right? But he was the best flamenco guitarist. So I say, don't worry about that aspect. Just expose yourself to as much flamenco as possible. Start listening to it every day, all day, and learn from that. Learn from the best artists. And if you are surrounded by that music from the early age, like I was, you will be able to do that. And you will probably not play like a Spanish person, but it's going to be your own take, your own interpretation. And really, it will only enrich flamenco if you are able to do that well. And you should be able to do that well if you love it. So go for it 100%. Let the Spanish people do what they do best. Let them play how they play, and you play how you play. So there's room for everybody. No, yeah, there's enough space. Even if the whole planet played flamenco, there'll still be enough space for some more. So
that's a wonderful answer, Grisha, and thank you for sharing those words of wisdom with those watching. I think it's fair to say anyone who's ever picked up an instrument and tried to learn to play it, at some point, hopefully, they've aspired to be a good musician. But I think in order to achieve anything, you first have to define it. Specificity is quite important. So let me ask you, Chris, what does it mean to you to be a good musician?
Have you disclosed what you think is a good musician?
What would I think's a good musician?
Yeah. Go on.
Turn the light on me.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'll go for it. For me, there are kind of being a good musician is a tripod of three key elements.
Okay.
And what I tend to find is people focus a little too much on one and assume that's the majority of it. But a tripod is supported by the three legs. If you kick one away, it falls. So for me, the bit that people focus all their energy on is the kind of expressing your inner world through music, and by doing so, moving your audience. Now, that's a very important leg of the tripod. But for me, that's supported by the other two legs. One is having a good technical facility on your instrument. Because if you don't have that, your ideas are always going to be limited by what you can and cannot do. So you have to have that as part of the mix. And the third one is a technical understanding of what you can do on the instrument. You know, understanding the kind of the theory that underpins a lot of things, essentially different ways you can approach the same problem and get an interesting solution. Because if you don't have that, your creativity will always be limited to a certain extent by your ignorance of how to get somewhere. You're blocking off different options you can choose from. So for me, those three are kind of the tripod, the triumvirate, if you will, that underpins a good musician. It's being able to play the instrument to a competent technical standard, so you're not limited. Understanding how things can work, so you know lots of different ideas that you can work with to solve one problem or try something that's a bit out of the box. And that helps come together if you have a creative disposition to help you communicate your inner world through music and hopefully move your audience. So for me, it's that triumvirate that makes a good musician. But I might be wrong. What do you think?
No, I like that, man. I think at one point I would have said pretty much those things as well. But I guess I would now come from it from a slightly more almost is anarchistic the right word? Kind of an extreme, maybe quite of an extreme viewpoint. I think this has been developed from approaching the instrument in a way that I've not been making music from a discipline or a musical culture that exists specifically. So I haven't necessarily been trying to achieve something. That might sound a little bit far out. I mean, I've obviously been trying to create things and make a career out of it as well. That's actually been a very conscious choice, but I've not been trying to sound like someone specific or what have you. I also find from my work in music education has shaped the sort of, again, more I suppose kind of seemingly extreme viewpoint of the musician thing, and that is that I think what I would agree with you 100% in, like, that's what makes a well-rounded musician, or a musician who is able to sit into a scenario of, I don't know, be able to perhaps improvise, to be able to compose something within an allotted time, to be able to do those things. However, I've found often the most incredible and wonderful things are coming from people who maybe don't possess those skills, or for me, when I've been creating and playing, it might be from actually not having those things as well. So working with instruments that I can't play, for example, is something that I've been dabbling in recently, or my work with guitar ensembles where I've been working with players who might be complete beginners, where we're stripping things down to the absolute tiny sort of minimal ways of playing because their technical abilities are limited and their understanding is limited. So I think in some ways there is a sort of a well-rounded musician, but there almost isn't a good musician. Do you know what I mean? There is just musicians. We're just making it. And actually, I think you could be the most, but this relates perfectly to the sort of the grading system, for example, of we can put students on a trajectory to get here, to be able to achieve this, and then they will be super well-rounded, and that's some great foundation. But actually, I think it's far more complex and abstract and crazy than that. I think actually sometimes people can create the most wonderful and amazing music from absolute lack of technical ability, but maybe they're coming from it from a perspective of something that's just completely different. And I know that probably doesn't resonate with people who maybe are just trying to pick up the guitar and achieve something at the end, and that's fine. There's nothing to take away from that. But I think, yeah, there is so much scope to be an incredible and amazing musician, but actually to lack some really fundamental things, bit theory, bit technical ability. You know, actually you can be brilliant. You can be brilliant without those things as well.
Well, you've raised a really good point there, because I'm wondering if maybe underpinning that question is a definition of two things, because ultimately, I suppose what we've not defined is the role of the craftsman and the role of the artist, because those two are distinct identities, and you can be a fantastic craftsman and a mediocre artist, and you can be a fantastic artist and a mediocre craftsman. So I wonder if that's something that maybe needs to be thrown into the mix when considering a question like, what is a good musician?
Definitely. But I think so much musical learning, not just schools in any way, but just even however it is that we learn, it's quite often focused on that craftsmanship, isn't it, again, rather than artistry, partly because the idea of teaching artistry is kind of a little bit ridiculous in some ways, isn't it? Yes. It's like, here is how you will be a brilliant artist. So it's kind of like, well, that is kind of silly. But then, I think that then breaks down the idea of if you can teach that. I think you can actually teach that if you come from teaching from a perspective of where you're not filling empty vessels. That's that idea of actually, look, here's some ideas of inspiration that you can follow. I'm just facilitating you to find new and exciting things. I think if you teach from that perspective, you can then you can teach artistry and craftsmanship. But I guess most teaching and stuff comes from the idea of, I will give you the tools to be a craftsman.
That's interesting. I really enjoyed that element of our discussion. And by the way, no one's ever thrown it back at me and asked my opinion first. So that was, congratulations. You're the first one who's done that.
Good. Maybe if someone else does it in the future, say something completely different.
I will, yeah. I'll just completely contradict everything I've just said.
Yeah.